what is it about the erotic side of coaching that you find in your practice, and how do you deal with it? Just as a general question that we could get started with, and I'd like to ask Michael to begin.
I'm happy to begin, but you have to say the question again, Harry. I'm not sure I understand it. Sorry.
What is it about the erotic side of coaching that you actually deal with, or you're interested in dealing with, or you hate dealing with?
Oh my, that you expanded that.
I added that, yes.
Yeah, I'm just going to say something briefly. And by the way, in terms of time, I have to jump off the call 15 minutes early, so I'm going to have to do that. We have some plumbing issues we have to deal with today. Let's see, what is it? Oh, I think my opening kind of comment is that Eros is so complicated for so many of us. It should be more simple, maybe. We would all love it to be, but it's not. And so the complications that people bring to coaching around sex and Eros, I find both frustrating and also very satisfying, because I think it's a really important part of all of our lives, and something that just about everybody I know struggles with some. So I enjoy both the complications and the results when somebody pushes through some kind of barrier or some kind of obstacle, whether it be in their brain or in their body or in their belief system or their behaviors. So it's a ripe area for lots of coaching. I'm going to use less words than more, a la Jeff Moore. I'll stop there for now.
Okay. Alan.
Hi, Harry. So yeah, I'm glad you rephrased the question. First of all, can you hear me okay? Because I switched headphones. Okay, good. Well, the thing that I'm interested in and the thing that I hate about it are kind of tied together, because so much stuff gets in the way of people getting in contact with their true erotic self. Lots of shoulds, lots of shame, lots of beliefs, things that just block this thing that really fundamentally is very simple. So the trick is to get in contact with that. And that's always the avenue I'm trying to get to, is to get back in contact with that core playful self that's inside.
Okay, thank you. And what about Dave?
So first off, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And I love how we're all in this little mini Hollywood squares right here on the four of us together.
If somebody is typing, please stop or put yourself on mute. If you've got noise going on around you, put yourself on mute. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt you, Dave.
No problem. So I think, I agree with what Michael and Alan said about the frustrations and about the joy of it. What I would add to it, the frustration, I think there are two things. The first thing is that it seems that even though there is so much sex infused into our culture, into advertising and what have you, we still are very, very weird about sex and about talking about sex and about dealing with sex. And I think the other thing that frustrates me about coaching around sex and sexuality and sexual expression is that there is a desire by a lot of men to move forward in those areas to create something different in their life. And at the same time, it just seems too much effort for them. They're willing to give up. Other things take precedence. My job got in the way. I don't have time to, spend time with my partner. I don't have time to date. That somehow sex and sexuality isn't all that important. And what I really love about it is, I think, especially for gay men, the gift of our sex and sexuality is unlike what we see in the world around us right now, which is sex is an expression of power. For gay men, I think it's always been about sex as an expression of authenticity. So when men were having sex on the crumbling docks in Chelsea or in the alleys south of Market in San Francisco, it was really about expressing themselves as fully and openly as they could at that particular time. And although we may have judgment about how they did that at that time, it was one place, you read incidents of, men who went to St. Mark's Baths and how some of them lived there for the weekend because that was the only place they could be who they really, really at their core were. So I think that's why I love it, is because it unlocks so much of this authenticity about who we are in life.
So at the Gay Coaches Alliance, we've often had a conversation about why do we need this conference, or why do we need this alliance? What is gay about coaching? And why is it we want to have this special effort and community of gay men? And you just touched on it with your remarks about power and authenticity. And what do you think it is about us as gay coaches that can bring a interesting perspective to clients, whatever their orientation? I'll ask Dave.
Okay.
And then Michael and Alan can weigh in.
Well, I think, first off, as gay men, I think we approach sex differently than men who are heterosexual, and women as well. I think, Alan alluded to it, there's a certain playfulness about how we experience sexuality. I think gay men can get to a place where sexuality and sexual expression can be about experimentation. And so those are some things that we can bring to not just a coaching interaction around sex and sexuality, but to other parts of life. I think the other thing that is unique about gay men coaching other men around sex and sexuality is that hopefully we have some understanding about sex in a different way that's not connected to toxic masculinity. That isn't about proving how much of a man we are by how we fuck. So that there's something more there, that we can explore connection, we can explore intimacy, we can explore, pleasure, we can explore embodiment, and a lot of things like that.
Thank you. Michael, do you want to weigh in?
Sure. I think that one of the advantages that gay people have, it's kind of like Jeff's opening question, what's a challenge that you are grateful for? The challenge, which I really loved, by the way, the challenge of coming out and becoming your true homosexual self is a really difficult one, and some people never make it, as we know, and other people struggle successfully and thrive because of that challenge. And so we have the opportunity to come through it with a greater sense of consciousness and self-awareness and choice about how we relate to other men sexually and how we relate to that part of our lives. So I think that's a distinct advantage of gay people, but also of us as gay coaches, perhaps some greater awareness and sensitivity and some strength from the battle we've gone through.
Mm-hmm. The battle we've gone through. Alan, do you have any addition or follow-up to that?
No, I think Michael and Dave said it really well. I liken the being an outsider, having to find your own way, to be, it's grueling. And I'm not sure it's as true anymore for young gay people coming up, which is both good and bad. But I liken it a little bit to like the shamanic experience, or any experience where you're trying to see beyond the regular world. In those instances, you do something like fast or something like that to push yourself outside of the normal reality. And as gay people, we are forced outside of the normal reality by circumstances against our will often, and not everybody survives it. But if you do have some wisdom to bring back.
So I know that you have, over the years, you have worked with men in the process of coming out. And in our life, there isn't any other area, very few areas where we are required to come out. Sometimes people have to come out of the closet spiritually, but we have to come out of the closet as gay men. But then there's the experience that our erotic lives we keep in the closet too, and we have to come out. And one of the things that keeps us from doing this is shame. And I know that you work with men, and I'd like to ask you, what's some of the things that you can tell us about working with shame? And I'm going to ask the other two to follow up on that. So make sure you're listening.
Is that for me? Is that what's
That's for you, Alan. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, so sometimes the shame is so big and there's so much around it that you just have to deal with whatever the story is around that. And my secret agenda is to do a work around that, if possible. Sometimes I'm successful, which is to get them in a confidential container, a safe place, and be able to connect with that boy that's in there, the inner playful self. And sometimes you can kind of step away from the shame sometimes, and then you bring their attention back to it and say, hey, look what just happened. And you forgot all about the shame for a while. That's my ideal situation. But sometimes you have to do things that are around, getting away from some of that shame, like an old story or something they have been taught as a child. And there's different modalities for doing that. But yeah, that's my answer on that.
Your answer is correct. And one of the things that I want to point out to you is that one of the reasons why we can do this work with you, Alan, is because fundamentally you are shameless about this particular topic and what you do with it in your life. So it is a built-in trust purveyor that if this guy lives his life like this, I can trust him. And this is a unique thing. If we are shameless about something, people can trust us. So Dave Allen, what do you think about the conversation about shame and dealing with it?
Well, when we were emailing back and forth about the topic today, I remembered something that Michael always talked about in one of the body electric workshops he did, which is this whole notion that shame can't exist out in the open light. That shame is something that like mold festers in dark corners and spaces that we don't shine any light to. So once we start talking about it, once we start bringing it out in the open, it can be really, really powerful. And I think that's one of the gifts that any of us have as coaches, whether we coach on money or sexuality, is we give individuals the opportunity to give voice to the things that they keep most hidden. And so whether whatever the shame is about, bringing it out into the light is a really important thing. And I'm sure everybody represented on the call today has had opportunities to hear a client reflect to them, you are the first person that I've ever told this to.
Mm-hmm.
And that always is a really honored place to be, to hear somebody say that, because I'm speaking this for the first time. And so I think that's one important thing. And then I think the second thing is about helping clients come up with experiments that they can use to create new ways of feeling about whatever it is that they were feeling shame about. So if it's about anal sex, then creating experiments where they can begin to have a physical experiment that says this is pleasurable, this is enjoyable, and getting some new point of view on what it is they're actually doing, and then giving a response back. It's like, so this is what happened, and this was really cool. And so acknowledging that that's a part of their life, I think, is a lot of times a very powerful thing. Experimenting and then acknowledging that with a coach.
Okay, and before I get to Michael with this question about shame, I would like to point out to our members of the call and anyone who might be listening later that Dave Allen is an instructor at the Body Electric School. Michael Cohen is a retired instructor at the school, and Alan Seward is a student who has taken many classes at the Body Electric and assisted in many of these classes. So one thing they have in common is this educational thread that goes through what they're talking about. They're not talking about it from a place of writing books. They're talking about it from a place of having done it in the real world. And Michael, what's your take on shame?
Well, I heard a rumor that there was a book being written by one of the gentlemen on this panel, Dr. Allen. So my take on it.
You're outing me, dude.
Oh my.
I was out in
Confidentiality. Yeah, it's all right.
both of you have books in you that we're waiting for. The world is waiting for. And I'm serious about that. You made me forget what I was going to say. Oh, I know what I was going to say. You reminded me when you said education, so much of, I think, coaching that we do around Eros is about teaching people because people just don't know. And that's true in a lot of areas of life. But, you know, to say it would be good for you to disclose to me that which you're holding on to or whatever it is you feel ashamed of or that secret desire you have, that would be good to speak it out loud for the following reasons. So that kind of back to a famous quote from you, Harry, about people need permission and instruction, and then more permission and more instruction. How do you do this? And part of the problem with shame over our sexuality is we missed, you know, none of us were there when they taught sex ed to gay boys. Because they didn't, and so we're all getting it as adults, and we have a somewhat of a disadvantage because we taught ourselves, which was better than nothing, or we learned from each other, which was also better than nothing. But we've learned a lot of kind of maladaptive beliefs, mostly, and behaviors that restrict us more than satisfy us. So I think. A lot about shame is speaking it, confronting it, and seeing how it limits us. And also one of the things, you know, you mentioned the Body Electric School, one of the greatest aspects of that is that we learn in a community. So you see, oh, I'm not the only one who has this fucked up idea about XYZ. Every man in this room has that. So that's a huge component or one way of coaching men about Eros.
Good, and we're going to play a little game today. You didn't know about it, but it's called Situation Eros. And I'm going to give you a situation and like you to comment on it. This actually happened to me. A man I knew, not called me up. He was from another community I belonged to. He called me up on the phone and said, I really need to talk to you. Can I come to your house? It's really urgent. So he came over to my house and he sat down and I said, what's the matter? And he said, I feel so bad. I don't know what to do. What happened? Last night I came home from work. My wife and children were out of the house and I had my dog give me a blowjob. And I feel so, yes, there's Michael's look. That's all the information I got. What would you have done?
What was the dog wearing?
Take it, Alan.
Harry,
What?
what kind of dog?
What kind of dog?
What was he wearing?
A small dog. Yes. And after you tell me, I'll tell you what I did.
Okay.
That worked.
Okay, well, first I would, I guess sounds like I got called on. The first thing I would do was congratulate him for telling me the story, because that took courage.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would quiz him about what was behind the experience, and then see if, among other things, see if there was something he felt he needed to do to apologize, atone, or make up for any negativity he still had around it. But it's an avenue of learning. There was some reason that happened. That would be what I would get curious about next.
That was beautiful, Alan. You were curious, which is no matter what the situation, when we're coaching around Eros, that this is essential. And Michael, what would you do?
I kudos to you, Alan. That's a rather brilliant answer. I think I would, and I love it specifically that she said honoring the fact that he took the risk to tell you. That's really excellent coaching. I can't think of what I would do next. I guess I would want to know, what is it that he wanted by telling me? What do you want from me?
Mm-hmm.
Before I assume what I would do next.
Mm-hmm.
I pass to Dave.
Dave, okay.
Well, I know I said, I'd ask what kind of dog it was, in jest when we started, but I think there's a piece about normalizing the situation that gives you a moment to say, okay, so this isn't the weirdest thing I've heard today.
Yeah.
And then going, same line that Alan did. So really being curious. One of the other things I'd be curious about is, was it pleasurable? And where do you go from here? What's next for you in this? Was it an experiment and this is indicative of something that you want more of in your life? Is it specifically this experience you want more of in your life? Or is it really something that you want? Because I think so much of sex and sexuality is about satisfying needs. And I remember something that Harry used to say years ago, that it doesn't happen quite as much today, but the men who are on their knees in a tea room sucking cock after cock after cock for hours on end were on this hamster wheel of desire. They were getting a little tiny bit of their need met each time, and it was enough to keep them going, but not enough to satiate the desire. So I think this is a similar situation. So what's the desire that's underneath this? And what do you really need and want in your life?
Well, you all won, and you're all getting free tickets for a weekend in Palm Springs. If you look under your seat, you'll find tickets.
Oh, good.
Yes. And so you really demonstrated with this situation what a coach would do around the erotic. And you each mentioned specific things. Some of them the others didn't mention. Dave mentioned one thing where is to demonstrate in some way that this is really not unusual. This, and the fundamental question was, what is it you were wanting for yourself from the dog? And the other one that Alan mentioned is you have to make not an amendment, what's the word? You have to atone, amends to your dog. And he specifically told me what he would do. And then there's a question about, what are you going to do the next time this comes up? So if you're a straight man, a wife and children, and you obviously, what are you going to do if you want a blowjob? That's a good question to contemplate. It's probably easier now to deal with that because of handheld apps. But I wonder if, so for everybody on the call, I hope you picked up the various elements of what the three of these guys said, which demonstrate also that they were curious about this. I've had many examples of this in my life where people would tell me these things, and they thought that they were the only ones that somebody's making noises. Please stop. Put yourself on mute. If they're doing something and they think they're the only ones doing it, it's very hard to get rid of the shame. And I wonder if Alan or Dave or Alan have any particular short experience like that one that they would like to describe to us about a client or someone you knew. Anybody? Oh my God, I have 25 of them. Come on.
Okay.
Well,
Dave?
so this is a little bit different because it's not about it was triggered by a specific thing, but it wasn't something so unusual. And it happened just recently with a client I'm working with. And he had been with a group of men exploring eroticism in community in a workshop container. And he was feeling very much like he'd get to a particular point and then he'd just freeze and hold himself back. And part of it, what he was noticing is that there were times, when he was like engaged and really enjoying himself, but every time it seemed like he was going to just lose himself in the process, he'd lose his erection. And so he was thinking that something was disconnecting. But part of the conversation that we eventually had was, so what would happen if you just allowed yourself to let go? And he said, oh, well, if I allowed myself to let go, I'd probably get a small apartment in this city and I would start creating the art that I want to create. I'd be having a lot more sex, and my partner and the family that I need to take care of would stay back where they are, and I'd be living the life that I really want to lead. And so it was really for him about afraid of expressing his sexuality authentically, because that might be a big slippery slope into doing that in all parts of his life.
So the erotic leads to other areas of your life. If you unblock that, you unblock others.
Yes, that's why it's so important to not neglect it in coaching, at least from my perspective.
So it's part of that intricacy of the areas of our life. What do you think, Alan?
Well, I think Dave said it well, and I like, the parts of our lives are all connected together. And if you are shut down erotically, that's going to bleed over into other areas. And I felt a little bit like I was being asked to tell a salacious story with the question a minute ago.
Oh, no.
But I did want to mention a story I had of someone who had a very big fantasy around being a superhero. And he had this very elaborate fantasy life he'd never told anyone about. And we got to act that out. So that would be my example. He was shaming himself around it, but it was marvelous. It was so much imagination in it. And anyway, to get back to the question you have, I didn't want to get too far from that, about how erotic is involved in the other aspects of our lives. Michael, do you have something to say?
The only thing that comes to mind to add to this is that I've had many men, excuse me, over the years confess to me, and I'm sure many of us have had that experience, something they did as a child or as a teenager, or something that they feel was kind of weird or inappropriate or sick or problematic in some way. And that's a great opening, like the friend of yours, Harry, who came over, for them to explore, specifically for so many men who had experiences when they were younger that perhaps were not pleasant or okay with them. They formed some belief about themselves based on that. Like, I'm perverted, or I have twisted desires, or I can't have a relationship like everyone else, or I don't masturbate like other men do, or I have really weird fetishes, whatever. And so those limiting beliefs, we all know this, when you get to that belief, you can say, oh, wow, let's examine and look at where did that come from, and is that true? And how can you check that out in the reality of your life? And that's a moment of opening for people to actually break that old habit of how they see themselves.
So one of the signs of limiting beliefs about anything are adverbs. Did you know that? Listen for adverbs. So tell me some limiting beliefs that you have experienced that contain. This is an English test right now. Some of the limiting beliefs that people have with the adverbs always and never.
Oh,
Michael.
I can never come without porn.
Mm-hmm. What about always?
I always watch porn when I masturbate. Same thing, same version.
There was one in a movie once. Why do you always call your mother after we fuck? Dave, do you have any?
I always bottom or I always top.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the rule.
What about never?
I never bottom. I never top.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing.
Mm-hmm. What do straight men have about women and blowjobs? They never give blowjobs, or they never swallow, or
Right.
things like that. Those are adverbs. Alan, do you have any?
I'm always told, I'm always rejected when
I'm always rejected.
ask for something. Yeah, I'm more like look
I
as
never get what I really want.
Yeah, I never am as attractive as whoever else is there, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I always get picked last.
And for many men, that's a real experience.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But then we latch on to that and make sure it keeps happening and happening. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So now the segment of our program is follow up. Alan, you get to say your last remarks, and then we're going to have 15 minutes of Q&A from all of the participants in the call today. And I hope that you feel free to ask questions, as crazy as they may sound, and that if you don't ask and I hear silence, please give me your permission to actually call on you to say something. So thank you for your permission. I saw all your hands go up. That was wonderful. Alan, final remarks.
Well, in summary, our erotic sexual selves are a core important part of who we are. And you don't have to be a big muggus stud out there having sex all the time to be expressing yourself erotically. It looks different for everybody. It may seem to someone else like you're barely doing anything, but you may be having a great experience. So you have to allow for the wide range of sensitivity and needs and the way people are wired around monogamy, etc. But the key is to authenticity, integrity, getting someone integrity with the kind of erotic person they are. Thank you.
Thank you. Which one do you want to hear from next, Alan? Pick Michael or Dave.
Dave Areno.
Well, I'll do the marketing side of this first. I think this is a real growth area for coaching.
Mm-hmm.
There is a whole group of gay men out there that are getting to be 60, 65, 70, and they're experiencing changes in how their bodies respond, and they're still wanting to be sexual. A lot of them shut down for 20 or 25 years, and they want to re-engage. So I think there's a growth industry out there in this, and I don't see a lot of it being done. And like Alan, I think this is so integral to living a full and enriched life that if we don't explore our sex and our sexuality and how we express ourselves, that we really have a difficult time getting to a place where we're fully authentic. And I think that's one of the reasons that I so love coaching men around these issues, is because so much else unfolds and unravels as you open up this part of their lives. So thanks, Harry.
Thank you, Dave, and good luck at your workshop this weekend.
Thanks.
PSI in New York City.
Yes.
Michael.
In summary, I would say, if it's not part of your intake as a coach, it might be something that you bring up at some point. Is it okay if we talk about your erotic life? Tell me what's going on sexually for you. And it may not be appropriate in some situations, but I will bet you that it will be relief for clients if it gets brought up, if they haven't already brought it up. So bring that in And oftentimes when other things are blocked, if we kind of touch on that one, that opens things up. And then I'm just aware of, my two cohorts here, Alan and Dave, the work that you guys are doing in the world. Alan, you with individuals, but also the mass appeal you have with the movies that you've been in, modeling playful, open-hearted, consensual. It's very important these days. Sex. And Dave, the teaching that you're doing this weekend is brilliant. I mean, talk about excellent coaching. So I honor the work that both of you guys are doing. And Harry, thank you for calling this panel together. And I'm anxious to hear what other people are thinking.
Thank you. And before I turn it over to the panel, or I mean the guys on the call, I wanted to just say one thing. We restricted our chat today around coaching around the erotic. And there were many socially relevant topics that we chose not to talk about, like internet porn and hookups and addiction and promiscuity, those kinds of things, because they're more topics, and we certainly would be happy to have a panel and talk about them. But that's why you specifically did not hear them mentioned. And I'm sure that you all know that Michael and Dave and Ellen bring many, many years of authentic experience in talking about this subject. So this is your chance to really have an opportunity to comment or question or challenge these guys about anything. And who would like to be first? Dun, 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 dun. Tom, is that you? You have a question.
I do have a question, so let me pitch it out. My question is this. We mentioned briefly about shame and about toxic masculinity. Specifically, I'm addressing the idea that the hypermasculine edge to the gay life, it is true for some and not all, that's for sure. But there is that edge of overdoing what is the masculine. And so I guess my question is, how does that tie into the way we coach people? We just normalize whatever shame they may have and whatever fear they may have, and then allow for a greater expression of what they most desire and what they most need in their lives. But can you speak a little bit more to toxic masculinity as you've seen it?
Who do you want to talk, Tom?
I think Dave brought that up.
Okay.
I did. So, Tom, if I'm understanding what it is you're curious about, is one of the ways that gay men have expressed their masculinity is by exploring leather and BDSM and going to a hyper-masculine place, so uniforms, those type of things.
Correct.
So I think that's in some way a response to how the world viewed gay men. And it's, I'm not a limp-wristed little fairy. I can look damn hot as something that fell off, a page out of the Tom of Finland catalog. So I think that's a little bit different than exploring masculinity in a way that is limiting. I think in the way it becomes limiting is that that's the only way that you express it. My experience in the world of kink and BDSM is that hyper-masculine has what my Tantra friends would call a yin and a yang to it, that there's this big, bold expression of masculinity, but then there's this other side of masculinity that is less cock and more testicular, that's really about holding and nurturing. So after I put you on a St. Andrew's cross and I flog you to a place where maybe you have a huge emotional experience or that you have a huge physical, spiritual experience, then I carefully take you down and that I wipe you off and I cradle you and I give you time to feel what you're feeling. I acknowledge and let you know that what you're feeling is valuable and important. And so I think that balances that sense of hypermasculinity. And certainly, gay men aren't uniform in how we express it. There are certainly men who just get off the train when they put on the gear and try and be hyper masculine. But I think the one thing about the world that we've created and the experiences that we've created, leather clubs, play spaces, is that we also value this other side. And if you go into a leather club, there are a lot of men who will tell you, it's like, I'm not going to play with you, or I don't want you in my space unless you do aftercare, which is the nurturing, that real caretaking piece. And, you can be a big old top and fierce and scary, but you better know how to provide the other piece of it too. So I think that's where we differ. And that there is a power exchange, but it's a power exchange that's created in an element of trust, which is really different than a Weinstein, which is just, I am showing you how fucking powerful I am, bitch. And this is, I'll be powerful for you to create a space for you to surrender into. And those are two different things.
Cool.
Thank you.
I want to agree with what Dave said, and I just want to add something. I totally agree with you, Dave. And I heard a slightly different question in what Tom was asking, and I may be wrong, but I thought of guys who are trapped in a kind of a shallow version of masculinity. And I get men like this sometimes. I call him Mr. Man. And when Mr. Man comes in, it's very hard to get through that carapace of how badass they are, or they think they are. And the challenge with him and the desire with him is to really get in touch with the opposite side of him, the feminine and the flowy part and the sensitive, open part. So that's what I heard in that question. It's hard to do sometimes, but I do know I've had a couple of clients over the years who are like major power people in the world, like corporate bigwigs. And what they had in common was that they loved dressing up as a beautiful feminine girl and being told how pretty they were. And so they took their world, it's one extreme this way, and in their private life, they're doing it the opposite this way.
Right.
And it makes them even more powerful.
Right.
It does not make them weaker. It makes them even more strong. And that's true masculinity to me.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Jeff, I saw your hand move. Were you raising your hand, or Jeff Moore?
No, yeah, I don't have questions, but a couple of things that triggered for me during this. One, you talked about an erotic coming out, and I've observed a lot of people I know have desires that they're not getting met because they find hiding to be more important than that. So they still have the desires, they still acknowledge the desires, but they're deprioritizing them because they care more. And contrast that to how do you hope to find what you want if you're not telling people what you want, right? And because most of them can't figure it out. So anyway, that triggered on some of the stuff you were saying. I like this erotic coming out and the idea. I think one thing I could ask is, what's the right time for that? Because you don't start with, here's everything I need sexually the first time you have a cup of coffee or say hello, right? So I guess the question would be when, or how you know when.
When and how do you know it?
So I heard several things in that. Yeah, I heard several things in that question, and one of them that popped up for me in what you said, and maybe I didn't quite understand it, but was there is actually some protection and wisdom and intelligence sometimes in that not being willing to ask for what they want. There was a reason that they didn't do that. Like there may be a situation in place where you would get beat up if you did that. So my answer is the appropriateness and the right setting and the right container. A coach working with you or a sacred intimate is going to build a proper container, a safe place to explore this stuff in. So there we go. Who else?
I would agree with what Alan said. I would just add that I think sometimes you need a foundation. So whether it's your own personal experience, because I kind of heard that in what Alan was alluding to, you know, working with the sacred intimates, so you have some foundation to build this on.
Mm-hmm.
I think also there's an element of really, you know, drilling down into the desire with yourself, writing with a coach to find out what the desire really is. So if I want to do pudding wrestling, is that a one-time thing, or, you know, I want to get to a place where every time we have sex, we want to be, you know, in a big kiddie pool of pudding. And then I think the other thing is, as you get into a relationship, I think there's a piece about indicating that, you know, this is where I want to start. And as trust develops, you know, other things are going to come into this relationship, so that you create a dialogue that says, this is going to be how I show you trust, that I'll reveal more of my desire to you as we move forward. And that continues to build the trust, and it acknowledges the trust that's been given, acknowledges and appreciates it.
Yeah,
Excellent answer.
thank you.
What would you all say to the question, how useful and important is it to have
Question over here, Harry.
Where?
Michael, I believe.
Michael.
Hi. Yes,
Sorry.
I just, in this discussion about eroticism and authenticity, I am also thinking about intimacy. Would anyone on the panel or even in the room care to speak about the relationship between eroticism and intimacy?
I nominate Dave. Would you comment on that? Because what you're about to do for the weekend is exactly the interface there, and it's so brilliant.
So what Michael's alluding to, Michael, is the workshop I'm teaching this weekend is called Power, Surrender, and Intimacy. And I mentioned this, you know, in one of my other answers before, is that it's about creating a safe space where you really can explore that intimacy. And one of the reasons that I really love the elements of spanking and flogging and bondage as a way to explore intimacy is because, for the most part, in relationships, we have this little tiny baby step walk down this gentle slope of intimacy. And that in this relationship of power dynamics where one man tells another man, I want to give you my power for a period of time, and I want you to hold that so that I can surrender fully into this place. And it's out of this power and surrender dynamic that intimacy opens up, and that it's a trapdoor into intimacy rather than this very gradual step down. And that, you know, the most intimate thing I think we can do with people is to kind of rip open that veneer of, oh, I'm proper or I'm politically correct, and just expose who we are erotically or in any other part of our lives. That's a very intimate thing to do, to expose our true authenticity and our true desire. So I think that's why this is important, and I think this creates, coaching around sex and sexuality creates the opportunity for that greater intimacy.
Comments from Alan or Michael?
Yeah, I want to say, I could talk about this shit all day.
Yeah.
I want to say the way I hold intimacy is that it's when you allow a kind of sharing of something you wouldn't ordinarily share. And that requires specific certain circumstances for that to happen. For example, in Dave's situation, they're creating a situation where you are giving your power to another man that allows a certain kind of intimate connection in that situation. We think of lovers being intimate with each other. That's because they have a loving, intimate container in which they can share things. It's all built on trust. So when you're exploring something of that level and that nuanced and unknown, it may reveal something or allow something that hadn't been allowed before in the erotic area. Michael? Nope. Okay.
Nope, nothing to add. Thank you.
Okay, we have time for one more question. If anyone has one, speak up now, please. Make your voice loud.
I will throw one out. Limiting beliefs around sexuality and when you address them. And obviously, trust is a predominantly important way to open the door around limiting beliefs. But having people look at their own limiting beliefs and then moving past them, usually that's bringing up red flags in some degree. So how do you work with the red flags that sort of signal resistance at every step as you move towards that? So I'm thinking about the resistance that will come up as kind of red flags and how the client might feel one way about the red flags, but how you have to work with them.
What do you mean by red flags, Tom, in terms of?
Let me give you, let's say, for instance, a red flag would be something like, yes, but that's only for other people, not me. Or a red flag might be, that's theoretically possible, but I'm not going to go there. I mean, these are kind of pushbacks. When you might offer something and you're getting a pushback, you've got to somehow deal with the pushback in a way that opens it, not shuts it down.
Thanks.
I'm not sure how. That's why I'm kind of curious. I'm asking that.
Good. Final question and final remarks. Let's start with Michael.
Yeah, let me just say something quickly, and then I'm going to have to drop off the call. I guess one of the things that you want to do in that situation is predict that that's going to happen for the person.
Mm-hmm.
So as you know, you've disclosed you have this desire, and this is probably going to be really difficult, and you're going to have some resistance. Let's name it as it comes up. And then when they say, oh, everyone else can do that, but not for me, say, oh, there's one. That's a limiting belief that you have, or that's a truth you hold that is going to keep you back. Let's wait and see what else pops up to get in the way of that. That's great. Keep speaking the resistance. Encourage that, actually. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Dave.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dave?
I think what I would say around limiting beliefs is, I think, what Michael said too is acknowledge them, and this is resistance, and it's like any other form of resistance that you run into as a coach. But I think the other thing, when it comes to everybody else, I'm the only one that does this. I think that's one of the things about the internet is you can probably find a Tumblr for anything you want. So if you want to find gingers who like to have blowjobs suspended, inverted, you can probably find that. And so I think there's an opportunity to invite some research. It's like, so what if you look to see if you are the only one? Okay. And approach that particular limiting belief in that way. And I think the other thing about limiting beliefs is I don't think limiting beliefs around sex and sexuality are any different than limiting beliefs around money or around relationship or around career success. It's really about what it is that is underlying that limiting belief, and how do I get around that? And a lot of times I think that's with experimentation, and whether it's an in-person situation. So let's try this. See what happens if you ask for this, and then what happens? Or maybe it's you send them out to engage that way with somebody else.
Great. Thank you very much, Dave, and thank you, Tom, for the final question. And now I'd like to turn it over to Jeff.
I don't get to answer the final question? No?
I was hoping not, but go ahead.
Okay. Well, I will make it brief. A limiting belief is an expectation around what's going to happen, and this plays out in what I call scripting. And someone will write me a 4-page letter about everything that's going to happen. You're going to take off my left sock and then slowly run your fingers up my leg, etc. So you need to let go of that belief that you know it's going to happen and be open to curiosity and experimentation.
Thank you. And you brought up an idea that nobody mentioned before, which is scripting, which is not the same thing as experimenting. So thank you, Alan. I'm sorry I wasn't aware.